Alright. This is going to be part one of the Making the Dead by Daylight sequel series. Before we get into the old stuff that's coming over and the new stuff that's coming in, I think we should talk about one simple thing: the story of Dead by Daylight. Because believe it or not, there is one. So, let me paint you a picture and enjoy the appropriate B roll. It's been millennia since the entity has taken all the survivors and the killers into its realm. For the longest time, the entity has toyed with these poor souls, some of which were willing to do their part, others just doing it because they have no other choice. The entity is cruel and manipulative. And yet, we're starting to get bored. The entity required more than just sacrifice. Seeing the survivors and the killers starting to do the same thing over and over again, whilst at the same time treating even themselves with disrespect. For they knew that, well, there was no hope. The entity would just do them in anyway, so what was the point of even trying to help each other at this point? The entity had grown bored for the first time in millennia. Not that it wasn't enjoying the carnage, or the fact that everyone was treating each other with pure disrespect, but because it's seen it all before. The entity was getting bored of the same old, tired story told over and over again. It was starting to predict what would come next, to the point where it was just not fun anymore. But what could it change about this age? And that's when it started to click. What if the prey could fight back? I mean, it's what they were doing anyway. The entity didn't really want to give these survivors any chance, but was so desperate for something new. What did it have left to lose? So, for the first time, the entity decided to have a little fun. Meanwhile, the survivors in the trials and the killers had changed. Some survivors and killers were long gone by now, thrown out by the entity, and the ones that remained had changed dramatically. Dwight Fairfield, now no longer a scared little child, is now willing to stand up for what he believes in. Meg Thomas became more altruistic due to her desire to help her grandmother, now no longer being able to be fulfilled. So she had to do it some way. Some killers were tossed out by the entity simply because they served their purpose. But for those that remained, things had changed for them as well. The hillbilly had become more ruthless, doing it all for fun, because it knew because he knew no better. Meanwhile, the wraith was having a hard time accepting that this is what his life has become. But no one dared defy the entity, for they knew that they would face a punishment worse than death. Killers such as the nurse, survivors such as Nia, were now being tossed away, all because the entity was bored of them, and all because people like Nia were trying to fight back. But there was one killer who just could not stand being a killer anymore. The Trapper. The Trapper fought back against the entity, which ended exactly as you'd expect. The entity won, and as punishment, he was about to be cast away. But the entity decided to have a little fun this time, splitting the soul of the Trapper into two people, Survivor and Killer. Evan McMillan and the Trapper. Evan, now free from his evil side, is doomed to repeat the same mistakes as he did when he was alive. He is doomed to face his own torment, to be at the receiving end of his own machete. Meanwhile, the Trapper, free from any morals, could now kill with no issue. The Trapper split in two. After seeing this brazen defeat, most killers and survivors decide to keep going, keep doing the trials, hoping that one day, maybe, death would come for them. However, other survivors and killers decided to go against the entity and start their own trials, control of the entity's realm, doing whatever it took, even if it meant putting aside their differences for once and teaming up. But then there were those who enjoyed the trials and would remain still. For the longest time, nothing was okay. These changes were nothing new. But then, one day, the survivors found that they were able to pick up the Huntress's axe. This confused them at first, until they saw just what they were able to do. At first, they thought this nightmare was over. They were free. But once they decided to attack and kill their tormentors, the entity was quick to remind them that death is never an escape. The entity grew in strength, feeding on so much hope for so long, has now found a way to give more hope. By giving survivors the chance to fight back, but never truly giving them a chance to escape, the entity could feed on as much hope as it wanted, without ever running out. Several new killers were introduced. Several new survivors were forced in, but all of them had one thing in common: new goals. Some killers tried to work together to finish the job. Other killers never wanted to do it, so they decided to team up with the survivors. And some just wanted to do the trials they were promised. Dead by Daylight 2: The Fog of the Entity. The rules have changed forever. So, that was the story. Look, I know it needs work, but I had the idea for changing the rules of Dead by Daylight, but I wanted to know how that would even make sense in the lore. And then it clicked with me. The entity could get it just as bored as we did. So maybe changing it so that the entity changed the rules just because he was bored seemed like a good seemed like a no-brainer to me. So yeah, please note if I blundered in any area in terms of storytelling. And please note if you would want to make any changes to this story. I will credit you, of course. Basically, all you need to know is that the entity got bored and is now changing the rules on the survivors and the killers. But I also wanted to add a new survivor without adding a new character, so I made that Elvin McMillan thing. So, yeah. Please comment down below what you think of this story. And please tell me how you would change it. I'm always open for any new ideas. Please let me know. Anyway, I've been the Gamer Nerd, and thank you for watching part 1. Part 2 will be coming soon.